good morning, everybody. How is your day going? You're welcome to Legal Clues on Emirate Radio. And as you know, on Legal Clues, we bring you tips, those legal vital tips that you need to know to be aware of your rights and obligations as citizens of the country, and those things you need to know to be able to make informed decision. On today's episode of Legal Clues, we'll be discussing the topic defamation of character. Like I said earlier on Legal Clues, we help you to be aware of so many things you probably ordinarily would not avert your minds to. And we, in turns, we help you to make decisions that as you should and to be able to live a crime-free life. On today's episode of Legal Clues, defamation of character is the topic we'll be discussing today. I want to believe that almost everybody would have heard of defamation of character, or defamation in the short form. And what exactly is defamation of character? Today we want to talk about what it means. We'll talk about the fact that it could either be a civil wrong or even a criminal wrong. We want to talk about the elements that they must contain before you can institute an action for defamation of character. We are also going to be talking about the remedies available when somebody defames you. If it's a criminal action, the penalties that the defendant could probably land him, it or herself. Now, what is defamation of character? Defamation of character, simply put, is the act of communicating false statements about a person that has resulted or will result to, the reputation of the person being hampered. When you make false declarations or statements against somebody and that resulted in the person's reputation being damaged, we can say that is defamation of character. Our laws define it in, different ways, but ultimately all leading to the same thing. Our penal code, for example, defines it as whoever by what, either by spoken word or reproduced by mechanical means, or intended to be read by signs or by visible representation, makes or publish any imputation concerning any person intending to harm or knowing or having reason to believe that such imputation will harm the reputation of such person, it is said to have defamed that person. So that is one of the definition of defamation under penal code. Under our criminal code act, it is defined as a defamatory matter likely to injure the reputation of another person by exposing him to hatred, contempt, or ridicule, or likely to damage any person in his profession or trade by any injury to his reputation. So simply put, defamation is where you communicate words that you know that is not true about somebody, either by saying it by words of mouth or by publishing it. Once you know that those words are not true, you communicated it to the public and you hampered or damaged the person's reputation, you can be said to have committed what we call defamation of character. And defamation of character can be of two forms. It could be libel or slander. What is libel? A libel is defamatory statement that is written. You have written it down. You sent it to somebody, probably in the newspaper. You wrote it down. That is libel. It can also take the form of a slander, where we talk about when you make those defamatory words by speaking it out. So defamation of character can be in two forms. It could be libel and it could be slander. It is libel when you write it down. You make those statements that can damage somebody's reputation, and you wrote it down, probably circulated it to the public. That is libel. It is slander where you only communicated it by words of mouth. Maybe you spoke it, you said it out in a public space. That can be said to be libel. And like I said earlier, defamation of character could be a civil wrong and could also be a criminal wrong. It is usually most cases a civil wrong, but it could be a criminal wrong where some elements are present. We'll get to that in the course of our discussion. Now, for you to say that defamation occurs, there are some elements that must be present. You cannot just say because I said something against somebody, now I've defamed the person. For example, if I just said to you now, are you a thief? We're just both the two persons in the room. You cannot say that I've defamed you. So there are some elements that must be present before you can say that defamation exists. The first one I will talk about is that the information must be made public. For example, you defame somebody, probably saying you are a thief. You mention the person's name, saying the person is a thief, probably in a public space where an event was ongoing, and you made it, so obvious that everybody heard what you said, claiming that the person is a thief when you know for a fact, or even if you don't know, that the person is not a thief, or you cannot even prove that the person is a thief, and you have said it openly. That is an element of defamation. You have said it in the public space is an element of defamation. Another element that must be present before you can say that defamation of character exists is where the defaming statement names the person. If I just say generally that most people here don't have sense, you get, for example, I didn't mention the name. Definitely, you cannot hold an action against me successfully for defamation of character because I didn't name you, I didn't mention your name. So firstly, you must make that statement in the public space. Secondly, you must have named the person that you have defamed. Thirdly, the defamatory statement must have a negative impact on the victim's reputation. It is not just enough to say that you have said this. If you call me a thief, for example, in the public space, everybody will be looking at me like I'm a thief. So it has, damaged my reputation in one way or the other. For you should know that when you make an untrue statement publicly, it can damage the person's reputation. It's not just mere talking, maybe talking about my height. That means a short person. Those are not defamatory words. We're talking about words that goes to the reputation of that person. If you make untrue remarks against somebody, it can even cost the person a lot of things, probably his job, his reputation, the way people sees him. A lot of things can happen that will damage that person's reputation. So it's also an element of defamation. Another element I have here is that the published remarks are demonstrably false. For it to be a defamation of character, those things you said must be false. So if you defame me and I bring an action against you and you cannot prove that those things you said against me are true, then you are guilty of defamation. So these elements must be present, before we can say that defamation of character exists. It must have been made in the public space. It must have named the person you have talked about. It must have, damaged the person's reputation. And of course, it must have been a false statement before we can say that defamation of character exists. Now, when does defamation of character become a crime? Like I said earlier, it's usually a tortious offense. It's usually a civil offense, but it can be a criminal offense in some instances. Usually when there is defamation of character, the usual thing to do is to bring an action under civil. To institute a civil action against the person who has made that statement in court. But when can it become a crime? When can it become a crime? There are some elements that will be present that will make people say, or the court order, that this statement you have made are criminal in nature. One is when it is done with intent to harm. These things are false. You said it intentionally because you want to create harm to that person. There's some defamatory words that will be said, ignorantly. Of course, ignorance of the law is not an excuse. But there's some words that will be said ignorantly. But there's some that the person saying it knows that these are false, but because you want to harm that person, you want to damage the person's reputation, you want to cause extreme harm to that person, you said those words. This can be a criminal action, a criminal defamation. The criminal action can be brought against you. Another thing that can be present for it to be a criminal action is if what you have said is likely to cause breach of peace or incite violence or disturb public order. These things you have said are not true. And definitely that if you say it, it can cause unrest, public unrest. It can incite violence within citizens. It can cause a lot of harm. It can cause, it can cause disorderliness in the public space. And you still went ahead to say it anyway. You can be held liable for criminal defamation. And another instance where you can be held liable for criminal defamation is where those words you said involves government officials or institutions, and you know that they are wrong, they are false, and you still went ahead to say it anyways. In these instances, if these elements are present, you can be held liable for criminal defamation. So now, if an action is brought against somebody for defamation of character, a civil action. Now, what are the remedies that the plaintiff can get from court? The first one I have is damages. If somebody has said something against you and he has brought damages to your reputation, the court can award damages against that person to pay you some amount of money, at least to mitigate the hardship or the impact it has, the negative impact that it has on your reputation. So the court can award damages against the person who made those defamatory words. So an award of damages for defamation is essentially dependent on two factors, that is the seriousness of the defamatory imputation found to arise from the defamation defamation, and the extent of the publication. For example, if it's a libel defamation where it was written down and has been circulated, probably, for example, the media space, how the media space is, online contents tend to circulate within minutes, circulate to a wide range of of people. So it depends on the extent of this publication, the extent it has circulated, and the gravity, the extent of that damages that it has done on your reputation. So damages will be computed by the court based on these factors, and the court will arrive at a sum that the court thinks just or think fair to be paid to help you, at least to mitigate the damages that your reputation has already had. Now, another relief or remedies that somebody that has been defamed can also have is injunctive relief. Here is like the court is making an injunction. For example, if you made a publication against me and you know that it's not true and you've circulated to some people, the court can make injunctive relief, mandating you not to circulate it again, not to further circulate it. At least let's limit it to the extent it is at the moment. Don't further circulate it. So the court sometimes make injunctive reliefs, prohibiting the person who defamed the defendant now from further committing that act or further circulating what has been earlier published. So these are just the major two reliefs that someone who has been defamed can benefit from court upon the defendant being found to have defamed that person. So if a criminal defamation action was brought against somebody now, we are not going to be talking about relief anymore. We're going to be talking about the penalties that the court can bring upon the person who defamed another person. So the first one is that for basic defamation, for example, offenders can face up to 1 year imprisonment. For defamation with knowledge of falsity, you know what you have said is wrong, you said it to harm the person can be looking at imprisonment of up to 2 years. And for defamation with intent to extort, you want to extort that person, they are not true, but because you want to extort that person, you said those things, it can be classified to be a felony, and if you're not careful, you can be looking at imprisonment to up to 7 years. So when you are talking about people, you should be careful the way you talk about people, especially in the public space. Now, there are defenses for defamation as well. If you have said some things, and somebody brought you to court to say that you have defamed me, and you think or within yourself that the things you have said are plainly true, you have defenses in court. So what are the defenses for defamation? The first one I have is justification. You know that this thing you have said is true. You can prove that this thing is true. If I called somebody, I said, "Oh, Mr. Kunle, you are a thief now," and I have evidence to the fact that you have actually stolen before, and I can prove to the court that Mr. Kunle had stolen before, then I will have, I'll be justified. So you are saying to the court that what I said is the truth. I'm plainly stating the obvious. I'm plainly stating what is true. Of course, you'll be justified. Another one is fair comment. If you're making fair comment based on what you've seen, then you also be you can also have a defense against defamation. And another one is privilege. If you are talking about privileged information, for example, that you're aware of, you also be having defenses to defamation suit against you. So, but you should know that your fair comment must be based on facts only. It must be an honest expression of what your real opinion is, and it must not contain insinuation or of corrupt or dishonorable motives. If all these things are present, then the defense of fair comment will not avail you. But you should also know that the privilege I said earlier is either absolute or conditional. So we should know that the speaker of a pub or a publisher, without reference to his motive, you should know that your motive must not be false. You should know that these things you are saying are not false. If you have knowledge of the falsity, you will be held liable and the defenses will not be able to avail you. Now, we have limitation period for defamation of character. Somebody defamed you now. Probably I defamed you 4 years ago. What have you been looking at since 4 years? Probably I published something in an article since 4 years ago. You didn't talk about it. You saw it. You were aware that I defamed you. You didn't bring an action against me. You didn't say anything. And after 4 or 5 years after, you're coming to court to institute an action against that person for defamation. You are stopped. The limitation period will have, taken up. And the limitation period for defamation of character is 3 years. It's just 3 years. So if you want to bring an action against somebody for defamation of character, it's going to be good that you bring it within that 3 years window period. You should know that you cannot sleep on your right and expect that the law will avail you. If you know that you are being defamed in any way, it is important to know that you should bring an action timeously within the limitation period that you have. So in all, you should know that no one likes to have their reputation smeared, but sometimes false claims lobbied against us can cause serious harm, including loss of job opportunities, decline in businesses, or even loss of your personal friendships, with people and the relationship. So when someone makes false statements about another person, especially in the public and to the public, it is a form of personal injury. It is a form of personal injury. The victim, whose name was sold, may definitely suffer significant damages from the defamation. And especially written defamation and libels, while spoken defamation, which is slander, both of it can, cause grievous harm to the person. Both are forms of defamation if they meet the criteria. So you should know now, by what we have said earlier, what defamation means, the forms it can take. You cannot just say, because I just spoke it, I didn't put it in writing. So it's not defamation, it's a form of defamation. If you speak it alone, it's slander, you're slandering the person. And if you put it down, it's libel. You should also know that in defamation of character cases, it must be proved that it was said to the public. The public space must be, it must be said in the public space. If I'm talking with you one-on-one, only both of us are in the room, and I said some things that you think are defamatory, you cannot succeed in a defamation action against me because you didn't suffer any damage. Nobody was there. Nobody heard it. But if I said it in the public space, or I put it in the newspaper, for example, in an article, or I wrote a book about it, you should know that that would be libel, and you can be held liable for defamation of character. So in all, we are simply telling people to be careful of what you say or write about people. A lot of people will put things down, probably because they just heard it, or some people sent some things to them. You didn't verify whether they are true or not. You just put it in the public space like that. You might be, digging your own grave for defamation of character if care is not taken. And if it's a civil wrong, thank your stars, you'll probably just be paying damages. If it's a criminal defamation, might be looking up to imprisonment for up to 2 years. And if it can be said that you intend to extort the person and it's false, you can be looking at something that is going to be classified as a felony, up to 7 years imprisonment. So in all, please refrain from defaming people. Speak only what you know are true. Speak only what you can prove. Speak only what you can defend. Not just things you heard. Probably you saw something on the social media space and you just said it against that person like that. Be careful of how you hamper people's reputation. Be careful of how you taint people's reputation. Be careful of how you smear people's reputation. I believe that with all this we've said, you must have gotten one thing or the other about defamation. You must have been aware of what it means. You would definitely henceforth be careful of how you relate with people, how you speak to people, how you write things about people. This is where we're going to be ending today's episode of Legal Clues on Emirate Radio. Until next week, when we're going to be giving you another interesting legal topic to educate us all. Please stay blessed. God bless you all.